The airport was a whirl of activity. Passengers hurrying to their gates, luggage rolling along the shiny floors, and announcements echoing through the loudspeakers. Maria, a black woman in her early 30s, stood in the long line, clutching her boarding pass. She glanced around the crowded terminal, trying to remain calm despite the excitement bubbling inside her. It wasn't often she had the chance to fly first class, and although she had the ticket in hand, a part of her wondered if she truly belonged. She was dressed neatly in a business suit, not flashy but professional, with her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. It wasn't the attire that made her feel out of place, but the contrast between her modest look and the plush surroundings of the first-class lounge. The gold-accented chairs and the expensive-looking decor felt like they belonged to someone with more visible wealth, someone who was used to this kind of luxury. Maria wasn't used to being in environments like this, despite working hard to get where she was in her career. As she boarded the plane, her nerves kicked in. She walked through the narrow aisles past rows of passengers settling into their seats, and made her way to first class. A subtle shiver ran down her spine when she noticed the flight attendants, Lindsay and Tyler, exchanging glances as she entered. They both had a certain air about them, polished, confident, and Maria couldn't help but notice, slightly dismissive. She took her seat, trying to act as though it didn't matter that their eyes lingered on her for just a moment too long. The attendants exchanged quiet words as she settled in, casting judgmental glances her way. Maria couldn't help but feel their eyes on her, as though they were measuring whether she truly belonged in this elite section of the plane. She focused on the seatbelt in her hands, pretending not to notice, but the feeling lingered, uncomfortable and sharp. As the flight cruised smoothly at 30,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed, signaling the start of the service. Lindsay and Tyler moved up and down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks to the first-class passengers. Maria sat quietly in her seat, her eyes flicking to the window every so often, trying to distract herself from the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. The crew seemed preoccupied with something more than the task at hand, something that made her feel increasingly uncomfortable. The moment the seatbelt sign was turned off, Lindsay and Tyler slipped into the galley at the front of the plane, their laughter immediately echoing through the thin walls. Maria tried to ignore it, pulling her blanket up over her lap and pretending to focus on the in-flight magazine. But she couldn't help but catch snippets of their conversation. Their voices were muffled, but there was no mistaking the tone. Their words carried a clear edge of mockery. "She's probably just here for the free drink," Lindsay said, her voice dripping with disdain. Maria's heart sank. She wanted to shrink into her seat, to disappear, but she fought the urge to let them see how much it hurt. "Yeah, a one-time lucky passenger, huh? What's she even doing up here?" Tyler chuckled, the sound cruel and harsh in the otherwise quiet cabin. Maria could feel her cheeks flush as she tried to ignore their comments. She wasn't new to judgment. She'd faced it her entire life, especially in environments where people like her were rarely seen, but it still stung. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat, gripping the fabric as though holding on would keep her grounded, keep her from breaking down. The whispers grew louder as they walked by again. "She's so out of place up here, isn't she?" Lindsay's voice was sharper now, tinged with mockery. "She'll probably get a taste of first class and never afford it again." Tyler snickered, and Maria could hear the rustling of something being shoved into a bin. "Right? I don't even think she knows how to use the amenities. She's probably going to ask about the pillow or something." There was another burst of laughter, the sound echoing through the narrow space between the aisles. Maria took a slow breath, her eyes stinging with the threat of tears. She had worked hard to get here. Every step of her career had been a battle against stereotypes, against the assumptions that people like her didn't belong in spaces like this, spaces that were reserved for the rich and the powerful. But here she was, with a first-class ticket in hand, and yet all she felt was humiliation. It wasn't just that Lindsay and Tyler were mocking her, it was the deep-rooted belief in their voices that she didn't belong, that people like her never would. But Maria didn't respond. She didn't confront them. She had learned long ago that reacting would only feed into their cruelty. Instead, she straightened her back and focused on something, anything, that would keep her mind from spiraling. She was here on business, she reminded herself. This was not about them. She was here to get things done. Maria glanced around at the other passengers. They were mostly engrossed in their own activities, none of them noticing or caring about the snide comments being made at her expense. No one came to her defense. She wasn't sure why she expected anything different, but she did. She wanted someone to stand up for her, to make it known that she was just as worthy of this space as anyone else, but it didn't come. Her emotions were a tangled mess: sadness, frustration, and the sting of humiliation. But instead of letting it overtake her, she decided to rise above it. She wasn't going to let them ruin her experience. She pulled her laptop from the bag beneath her seat, putting on her headphones, and closed her eyes for a moment to center herself. She wasn't going to let their petty cruelty define her. Maria had worked too hard for too long to let two small-minded flight attendants take away her peace. She breathed deeply, letting the quiet hum of the plane fill her ears. She would get through this flight with grace. She would enjoy the luxury that she had earned, despite their taunts. No one could take that away from her. No one could take her dignity. As the flight continued, Maria did her best to ignore the whispers and laughter. She focused on her work, on the goals that had brought her here, and on the fact that her presence in first class was a testament to her own strength. She wasn't going to let their small-mindedness shake her. She had earned this seat, and nothing at all could take that from her. As the flight neared its descent, the seatbelt sign lit up, and passengers began to stir, preparing for landing. Maria glanced out of the window, the sprawling city skyline below signaling their approach. Her thoughts drifted away from the earlier discomfort, and toward the important meeting she had lined up once they landed. It wasn't the most exciting part of her day, but it was a step forward in her career, a meeting that could open doors, if she played her cards right. Just as she was organizing her thoughts, a figure in a dark suit moved down the aisle, and Maria instinctively looked up. He was tall, with neatly combed gray hair, and an air of understated authority. It wasn't his suit or his posture that made her notice him, it was the way he carried himself. He didn't announce his presence like most of the other executives she had seen in her time. There was no show of arrogance, no need to draw attention to himself. He simply was. Maria's pulse quickened when the man stopped beside her seat, looking down with a warm, curious smile. "Excuse me," he said in a calm voice. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." For a moment Maria blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Why was he stopping by her seat? Was he one of the higher-ups from the airline? "Not at all," Maria replied, her voice steady despite her surprise. She offered a polite smile, and set aside the magazine she had been flipping through. "I couldn't help but notice you," the man continued, his voice still calm and friendly. "I'm usually pretty good at reading the room, but you don't seem like the type to be here on a one-time trip." Maria raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this conversation was headed. She hadn't expected any sort of attention, especially from someone who looked so important. "I'm just on a business trip," she replied, her voice even but carrying a quiet pride. "A lawyer, actually." The man's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "A lawyer, huh? Well, that's a bit of a pleasant surprise. It's not often I see someone like you in first class." He glanced down at her seat, and gave a small appreciative nod. "But I'm glad to be proven wrong." Maria felt a flicker of tension in her chest, her mind instantly going back to the comments she'd overheard earlier. "Someone like you." She didn't want to let it bother her, but it was hard to ignore. Still, she remained composed, knowing this wasn't the time or place to dive into the awkwardness she had felt before. "I've been in the field for a few years now," she explained, trying to steer the conversation towards safer ground. "I'm on my way to a big meeting with a corporate client. It's a step forward for me." The man's eyes sharpened, a subtle shift in his expression, revealing that he was genuinely interested. "A big meeting, you say? With a corporate client?" He paused, as if processing this new information. Then he offered a small knowing smile. "Well, that's impressive. I'm sure you've worked hard to get there." Maria nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction at his acknowledgement. She didn't need to explain how hard she had worked, how many late nights she had spent studying, how many compromises she had made to prove herself in a world that often doubted her. It was enough for him to understand that the title of lawyer didn't come easily. The man held her gaze for a moment longer before giving a thoughtful nod. "I'll let you get back to your work," he said, his voice warm but respectful. "But I'll be keeping an eye on you, Maria. You've got something about you, something rare." He glanced down at the seat number on the boarding pass in her hand, committing it to memory. "I won't forget your name." Maria felt a mix of surprise and curiosity, unsure of how to respond. She had just met this man, and yet he seemed to regard her with a level of respect that, quite frankly, she wasn't used to. His recognition, genuine and unassuming, was a stark contrast to the judgmental sneers of the flight attendants. Before she could gather her thoughts to respond, the man turned and walked away, his stride purposeful, blending back into the crowd of passengers who had already begun preparing for their descent. Maria sat back in her seat, her mind racing. Who was that man? Why had he stopped by her seat? The encounter had felt different. As she looked out the window once more, she found herself reflecting on his words. She had been nervous about the meeting, but now, with his unexpected recognition, she felt a renewed sense of confidence. This flight had been filled with more than just uncomfortable moments. It had also given her an unexpected boost. She made a silent vow to herself. She would rise to whatever challenges lay ahead, and whatever else came her way, she wouldn't let anyone define her worth. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, passengers began to gather their belongings, chatting excitedly about their destinations, but the atmosphere in the cabin was different for the crew. Lindsay and Tyler, along with the other flight attendants, were preparing for the next phase of their duties, chatting amongst themselves, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Meanwhile, in the terminal, Mr. Dalton, the CEO of the airline, had just disembarked. His steps were measured, and his demeanor calm, but there was an unmistakable air of authority about him. He was not the type to make a scene, nor was he one to flaunt his position. Yet, as he walked through the gate area, he couldn't shake the thought of the conversation he had had with Maria in first class. He had been impressed by her grace, her quiet professionalism. It had stuck with him. He approached the head flight attendant, Linda, who was overseeing the crew as they prepped for their next flight. Her expression was one of casual confidence, as if she had done nothing wrong. Mr. Dalton's presence caught her off guard, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Linda," he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm but firm undertone, "I'd like to speak with the entire crew, in private." Linda's eyebrows furrowed, but she nodded. "Of course, Mr. Dalton." Within moments, the entire crew had gathered in a back room, their chatter fading as they realized this wasn't a routine check-in. Mr. Dalton stood at the front, his posture straight, his face devoid of expression. "I've just come from first class, Mr. Dalton began, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight, "and I've heard some disturbing things. It seems there has been a significant lapse in professionalism." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They were all still riding high on their belief that they had done nothing wrong. After all, Maria had simply been another passenger in their eyes. They hadn't known who she was, nor had they seen any reason to treat her differently from the others. Linda stepped forward, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Mr. Dalton, I don't understand. We've been performing our duties as usual. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding." Mr. Dalton shook his head, his disappointment palpable. "No, Linda. This was not a misunderstanding. Your behavior was disrespectful and unbecoming of this airline. It was disgraceful." His voice hardened with every word. "You mocked a passenger, a valued passenger, and I don't care who she is. That kind of behavior has no place on my team. You humiliated her, and I won't tolerate that." Linda's face flushed a deep shade of red, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find words to defend herself, but nothing came. Tyler stood frozen, his face pale, his confidence evaporating. The crew members shuffled nervously, the tension in the room thickening. Mr. Dalton took a deep breath before continuing. "I just spoke with that one-time lucky passenger you were so quick to judge. Her name is Maria, and she is a highly respected corporate lawyer. She's on her way to an important meeting with a major client, something I'm sure you didn't know." He let the words hang in the air, watching as the weight of his statement sank in. The crew's faces turned to varying shades of shock and guilt. They had no idea who she really was. They had treated her like she didn't belong, and now they were learning that Maria wasn't just anyone. She was someone who could make or break deals, someone who held real power. Mr. Dalton paused, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the crew. "I'm deeply ashamed of your actions. I trusted you to represent this airline with professionalism and respect. Instead, you chose to demean a passenger based on your own biased assumptions." The room was deathly silent. Linda and Tyler stood motionless, their heads down, unable to look at him. "Effective immediately," Mr. Dalton continued, his voice hardening. "You are all being dismissed. Your conduct is unacceptable, and I won't stand for it. I expect better from my employees. This is not a second chance situation." The crew stood frozen, the weight of Mr. Dalton's words crashing down on them. There were no more excuses, no more explanations. They had been caught, and the consequences were swift and final. Meanwhile, Maria was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. She had already disembarked, and was making her way through the airport, her mind still focused on the upcoming meeting. But just as she approached the exit, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and to her surprise, the screen displayed a private number. She answered the call. "Hello Maria," a calm voice asked. It was Mr. Dalton. "I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to personally apologize for the behavior of my staff during your flight. What happened was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. It reflects badly on the airline, and I want you to know that we are taking full responsibility." Maria was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. "Mr. Dalton, he continued, not giving her a chance to speak. "I also want to assure you that we value your business. You're an important client, and I regret that you had to experience that kind of treatment. Please accept my sincere apology, and know that I will personally ensure you never have to endure anything like that again while flying with us." Maria stood there, her heart racing. She hadn't expected this level of care and accountability. She was still processing the words when Mr. Dalton added, "And if there's anything I can do to make it up to you, please don't hesitate to reach out." The conversation ended with a polite exchange of thanks, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling of disbelief. What had just happened? She had gone from feeling humiliated to feeling seen, heard and respected. She knew things had changed for the better, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt like an outsider in spaces where they truly belonged. As she walked away from the airport terminal, a sense of pride filled her chest. She had earned her place in first class, and now, she had earned something far more valuable: respect. Maria walked slowly through the airport, her thoughts swirling as she tried to make sense of the unexpected turn of events. She had been so focused on her upcoming meeting, that she hadn't anticipated the wave of emotions that would hit her after the flight. The CEO's apology still echoed in her mind. How his words, so genuine and direct, had completely shifted her perspective. She had been shocked by his kindness, but even more so by the sudden realization that something had changed. For so long, Maria had been accustomed to the quiet judgments, the subtle biases, and the whispered comments that followed her in spaces where she didn't quite fit the stereotype. She had always been aware of the way people looked at her, sometimes with doubt, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with discomfort. It wasn't just the flight attendant's behavior that hurt her, it was the constant feeling of being an outsider in a world that seemed to have so many invisible barriers. But today was different. Today she had been seen, not for the color of her skin or her appearance, but for who she was and what she had achieved. The kindness of Mr. Dalton, his acknowledgement of her worth, had been a turning point. It reminded her that no matter how others might perceive her, she was entitled to be exactly where she was. And for the first time in a long while, Maria felt truly empowered. As she left the airport, heading toward the car that would take her to her meeting, Maria couldn't help but smile. The road ahead still had challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned something important today, that self-worth doesn't come from how others see you, but from how you see yourself. Perseverance, she realized, wasn't just about pushing forward. It was about standing tall in the face of adversity, regardless of the obstacles. In a final message, Mr. Dalton had promised that the airline would work to create a more inclusive and respectful environment, ensuring that no one would ever face the kind of treatment Maria had experienced. It was a commitment that felt genuine, a step toward change that she hoped would inspire others as well. Maria entered the car, her thoughts steady and clear. She was ready to face the world with the same strength and grace that had carried her through every challenge before. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. And so, Maria's experience serves as a powerful reminder that no one should ever be judged by their appearance or background, no matter where they are. Through perseverance, dignity and the unexpected kindness of a CEO, Maria not only found validation, but also inspired change. Her story reminds us all that our worth is not determined by others' perceptions, but by the strength we carry within ourselves. If you've ever faced adversity, or felt underestimated, know that you are worthy of respect and opportunity, just like Maria. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of triumph, and leave a comment to share how you've stood tall in your own journey. Thank you for watching.